Good morning. We're learning as a schus for Shlema Chaya Basarach and for Meir Ben Cyril Perel when the Chavvav Amid Aleph, 6 lines from the bottom. And this is really a hemshech. It's really the end of the previous Gemara, even though in this over here they have a dot here. In the Mishnah, we had said that the temed, which is a concoction which you make by mixing grape seeds or sediment with water, if before it's hechmetz, before it starts fermenting, it's treated as water. If you'll take out the water, it will just be water, even as it is, and therefore you can't use meiser sheni money to buy it. You're going to use buy food with meiser sheni money, not water, and it's not going to pass a mikvah. And on the other hand, after tichmitz, it will be considered as full-fledged wine. And we had asked, the Mishnah is not like the Yehuda, not like the Rabbanan, because we have a brisa, which says if you make temed by mixing water with sediment, and then you remove water, and it's exactly the same amount of water as you had originally put in. So we said to Machlekes, the Tanakhama says the Chacham say it's potter from Trumas and Maises. It's not considered to be a Michael. It's just water. And Yehuda said it's chayiv, and they didn't make any mention of hechmetz. Said it just depends on when you take out the water. So either before hechmetz or after hechmetz is going to be shver on either Rabbi Yehuda or the Rabbanon. So Rav Nachman said B'Shem Rabbi Vavu that no, it's talking about Einachanami. The Machlokes over there is talking about Achar Shehechmetz. That was the whole discussion. Okay. Now we're going to bring a different shita that disagrees with that way of dealing with the issue. Rabbi Lazar has a different way of understanding that brisa. He says that the brisa of the Machlokes Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda is not talking about La'achar Shehechmetz. How do we know? The Amar Rabbi Lazar, Hakol moedim she'em mafrishin alav mimakom achar, elam kein hechmetz. Everyone agrees that you can't use when you separate trumas and maasros that koydem shehechmetz, before it became vinegar, you made temed, but it didn't yet ferment. You're not going to be allowed to mix, to take, let's say you have two separate jars or bottles of temed you made, you're not going to be allowed to use one against the other. Why? So obviously, kasava b'loy hichmetz machlokes. He says, because he holds that machlokes l'cham and Yehuda is prior to hichmetz. One holds it becomes wine, and the other one holds it still is water. So he's going to understand that our Mishnah is going to go like the Rabbanan who hold that Chacham hold b'kaidem shehechmetz. It's going to be it's going to remain water. So that's what our Mishnah says. Our Mishnah says that al shehechmetz, then it becomes wine. So what does this mean? That Rabbi Yehuda holds that you're not going to be able koydem shehechmetz. That Rabbi Yehuda who says Yechayev, he's going to say even though it's wine koydem shehechmetz, you're not going to be able to take off trumas and maasros from one bottle against the other. So that which Rabbi Yehuda says you can only take off the trumas and maasros from that same bottle of temed, but not from another. You can't take a second bottle of temed and take trumas from that on a different bottle. Why? He's concerned that in the end, if it never turns out to ferment, he says that it's going to be treated as wine, even before it's chaymetz. But the problem is, if it ends up not turning into wine, then then it really was water from the beginning. And then you'll have taken off from a bottle of water on a bottle of wine. If it turns out in the end, then will the mafreya say it really wasn't wine, then you'll have taken off potentially from water on wine or wine on water. Either way, you're going to have a problem. So therefore, he says that he holds that it's wine, but with the restriction, the temed cannot be used against a different bottle in case it turns out in the end that it doesn't turn to wine. A temed temed prior to it turning into fermenting and becoming wine. Meshika b'mayim. You can use hashaka to be matar. The rule is that, generally speaking, there's no way to be matar food that became tamei. You can't put it in the mikvah, right? The exception to that is water has a unique ability that you could use hashak on it, which is, we know that as far as a mikvah, that if you have a mikvah that's full of mayim chayim, you could use mayim she'uvim with hashaka, and it will turn the mayim she'uvim will make it also part of the mikvah. Also, but it also works l'gabi tamei water that became tamei become tar by attaching it, by putting it in contact with mikvah water that will be matar. If you just to remind you that which we said about that if you mix up shalosh lugim of mayim she'uvim, that it will passel a mikvah. That's only a mikvah that's not 40 sa. It's missing the shear. But a full-fledged mikvah, if it touches the mayim of any quantity, and that's what they do in mikvahs. They have like a little hole, and they keep refilling the water. They keep the original mikvah water separate. It's more than 40 sa, and then they touch it, and they clean the rest of the water, and they because you don't want to have a dirty mikvah of dirty water. You have to keep replacing it, but you replace it with new water, and they use ashaka to make it into a mikvah. So, but this also works not just to make mayim chayim, mayim she'uvim into mayim chayim. It also helps to make mayim tamei into mayim tahirim. But that only works on water. It doesn't work on wine. So we're saying, like our Mishnah said, before it fermented, you can use hashakon. But once it already turned into wine, hashaka is off the table. That which we say that you can do hashaka on the mayim before it's hechmetz. That's only that you already made the temet with mayim tahirim, and then after you took that mixture and it became tamei. But if it was water that was tamei, you mixed it with wine, and now you want to do hashaka even before it's hechmetz, it's not going to work. Taisus ultimately explains this that that it's changed forms. Once it's changed forms, you can only do it if it's in the same form as it was originally when it became tamei. So if it was temed and it became tamei, that's temed that has the din of mayim. You can then be metaru with hashaka. But if it was originally mayim tamei and then it became temed, so now it's in a different form, the hashaka will not be able to be metaru something in a different form than it was when it became tamei. That's what we're going to ultimately say. But Rav Gavia understood this differently. Also, Rav Gavia mibeksil amra l'shmaitza kamei Rav Ashi my taima my shmot me kar deloy. Why would I think that if the water was tamei from before and now that it's temed it can't be matar al yashaka? Damrin I de maya yakiri shachni tatoi. Since water is heavier, the water part of the temed sinks to the bottom. Upera kapi milel, and the fruit juice, the grape part of it, floats to the top. The loikasaklu hashakalamaya. And when you touch the two waters, it could be it's touching only the gray part, not the water part. He holds it gets segregated in the mixture, and we're concerned with hashaka won't work because it might only touch the gray part, which is and not the mayan part. So frek there, nami. But he says the problem with that svara, if the way Rav Gvi is understanding it, what difference does it make if it was first mayim tahirim and then it became temet and then it became tameh? That we say hashaka will work, but if it was originally tameh that it doesn't work, it should not work in either case. Once it's temet, the hashaka doesn't work because it might not touch the water. Elam avalvali, elamai. Obviously, we say that the water is fully integrated with the sediment, and the temet is considered to be a full-fledged mixture. Hachanami mavalvali, so it must be that it's a full-fledged mixture, and that can't be the understanding like Rav Gviya did. And that's why we have to explain, like we said before, that it depends. It has to be in the same. It has to have this. The water has to have the same status as when it became tameh in order for it to become tahar al yidei hashak.
According to Rabbi Gavia, he would hold that the woodwork or not?
Well, we don't have an answer. We don't understand Rav Gavia. It's a problem. We just leave it with a kasha on him. What would be the distinction? It doesn't really make sense the way he understood it. Why would it be that if it became tameh as temed, that we're saying that it could be matar al yidei hashaka? Why don't we have the same problem? Zok the mission. We're on Chofvav on the base. Kol makom. Good. We're back to Nashim. You don't have to worry. We're off Kachim for a couple of minutes. Zok the mission. Kol makom sheyesh mecher ein knas. Kol makom sheyesh knas ein mecher. This is another way of saying kol makom sheyesh mecher. It's talking about a girl. We know that there's a din that a father can sell his daughter as an amma bria, and additionally, there's a din that a woman who is mu'unis or aynus or mafata has to pay chamishim shkalim. However, the din of a father selling his daughter as an amma bria is only when she's a ketana, and the din of a naira having a din of that she gets paid, the father gets paid chamishim shkalim, is only when she is a naira, which is, right, a girl is we'll see exactly, but generally a girl is a katana until she is maybe stage Cyrus and she turns 12 years old. She then has 6 months after she leaves being a katana that she's a naira, and then after that she's a baigeres, she's a gedayla. So the Mishnah is saying, whenever, as long as she's a katana, that a father could sell her, and knas, he doesn't yet have the din knas, which happens when she's a naira. And as soon as she becomes a gedayla or a naira, that she has a din knas of chamishim shkalim, the father can no longer sell. Our Mishnah that just said this din is only Meir. They say that there is knas for a katana even before she becomes a naira. The Tanya. A girl from when she's born until she is maybe stay Cyrus, she has a din that her father could sell her as Amavriya. At that point, there's no knas. From the time she's maybe stay Cyrus until she becomes an adult, which is 6 months, she has the din of the knas of a einus umafata, but her father can no longer sell it. Divrei Reb Meir. That's her Meir, which tracks our mission. Which is exactly what our Mishnah said. He says from the time a girl is 3 years old, and one day until she completes her nairis, she has a din of einus umafata of chamishim shkalim. And the reason why he says from Gimel Shanma and not from Yom Echad, like we say Legabe Mechira, it's because a bia under 3 years old is not considered a bia, so there can't be chamishim shkalim for that. B'frek the Gemara, it sounds like the Chumma saying that there's only a din knas for a katana. What happened to the din of Mavariya? Zak Gemara, knas in mechaloi. Does he mean to say that there's only a din of knas and there's no mecha for a katana? No, that's what the Chacham was saying. No, they disagree with Meir. They say there is knas even by a katana prior to her becoming a naira. Next mission. Zak the mission. Kol makom sheyesh miyan ein chalitza, v'kol makom sheyesh chalitza ein miyan. Remember these things from what is it, like 3 years ago? We're learning Nashim. So miyan is if a katana can be sold, like we just said, by her father. If her father is not alive, she could be sold midrabanan. She could be sold as an amavriya by her mother and brothers. That's only midrabanan, and therefore she has a way to get out of it by doing miyan, by saying, I object to this this union. If anyone has any objections, they should stand up so the kala can pipe up and say, I'm not interested. So that's only for a katana. But once she becomes a gedayla, it becomes a real marriage, and she's going to need a get. So kol makom sheyesh miyan while she's a katana in chalitza. The din of chalitza is only on a gedayla. If a girl is neifeli yibam to her husband's brother, her husband died without children, she's neifeli yibam, and the brother does chalitza. But if she's a katana, the brother cannot do chalitza. And the other way around, once she's a gedayla, there's chalitza, she can no longer do miyan. Amrav Yudam Rab, Zu Divrei Reb Meir. This is the Quinter Meir. Yesh miyan b'makom chalitza. They say it's even possible for her to do miyan after she becomes a gedayla. The Tanya and Masai Habas Ma'anes Achas Tavi Shtei Cyrus. Divrei Meir. Meir says it's until she becomes a gedayla. Rabbi Yehuda Ma'achi Yirba Hashachar Al Alavin. He says until it's a little bit older, it's not just stay Cyrus, but where it's more visible that she's become, it's money, the godless are more visible, that it looks more like she's covered in that area. So that's when she becomes a gdela, that she's no longer able to do miyah. Zak the mission. Kol makom sheyesh tekiya ein havdalah. Kol makom shehavdalah ein tekiya. Back in the olden days, they used to have this, unfortunately, for a period of time, also from yeshivas kamenetz. They would make a trumpet to announce when they had a series of blows on a trumpet or on a shofar to let people know that it was going to be Shabbos. They used to have kamenetz that have a horn that would sound, and it was like supposed to be for the whole Flatbush area. And I was like 200 feet away. It was ear splitting. So that's what they used to do. They would start like early. Yeah, I'm sure. I feel bad for the people next door. So that's what they used to do. They used to start like with tkiyas and truas from the middle of the afternoon to tell people to close up shop, to start going home. It's time they would make another one when it was licht benching. So, and we have it, then we make havdalah. So the Gemara is saying, the Mishnah is saying that on Shabbos, that's going into Yom Tov, when Yom Tov is going into Shabbos, when Yom Tov is on Friday, you still have the tkiyas for Shabbos. You still want people to know that they have to finish cooking, and they have to finish their malacha of Eichel Nefesh, and this is part of the Eichel Nefesh, so you could blow the shofar on Yom Tov, that's Erev Shabbos. But then there's no Havdalah. You don't make Havdalah on Yom Tov, for Yom Tov, when the next day is Shabbos. We don't do that. We just, it's just Shabbos. V'chol makom sheyesh Havdalah, but if it's the other way around, if Yom Tov is on Sunday, so then we will say Havdalah for Shabbos, right? On the Friday, on the Matzah Shabbos, when we make Kiddush, we include Havdalah, ain't Tkiyah. But then on Shabbos, you're not going to blow the Chatzaitzris, tell people to stop malacha. There's no need for it. People are not doing malacha. You can't do Eichel Nefesh on Shabbos, and it's also to blow. It's going to be also to blow on Shabbos. And the Mishnah explains it. Yom Tov shechaliyas be'erev Shabbos. When Yom Tov comes out on erev Shabbos, taikin, you do tkiyas for loy mavdilim, but you don't do havdalah. Like we said, there's no havdalah from Yom Tov going into Shabbos because you're going from a lower kedusha to a higher kedusha. Shabbos is a higher kedusha than Yom Tov. It's hard for us to think about this because to us, there's 2 days Yom Tov, so it's usually both days are Yom Tov. When Moitzoi Shabbos, when Moitzoi Shabbos is going into Yom Tov, Mavdilin, so you make Havdalah for Shabbos, L'loi Toikin. But we don't do Tekiyas on Shabbos. Ketzad Mavdilin. What Havdalah do you make when you have Shabbos going into Yom Tov that was saying you make Havdalah? You say Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh. You say Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh, like we say. That's the nusach that we say in the Kiddush. He says it's not appropriate to say ben Kodesh leKodesh for between Shabbos and Yom Tov because they're really different. They're not equal. Shabbos is more chomer, so you have to say ben Kodesh chomer of Shabbos to Kodesh chal of Yom. Hechi teikeya.
It's nice. The first Mishnah explained. The other Mishnah.
Yeah, right. Just figure it out on your own. Hechi teikeya. What kind of tkiyas? Like we said, there was a whole sequence of tkiyas that they would do on a regular Erev Shabbos. What kind of tkiyah did they do from on when Yom Tov came out on Erev Shabbos that we said you still do the tkiyas? You weren't making the tkiyas for people to know to stop work because they're not at work. Rav Yehuda say tekeo Maria mitoich tkiyah. Yehuda says he makes a tkiyah and he goes straight into a trua within the tkiyah. He doesn't stop at all. Ravasi says he uses one breath, but the way Rashi explains it is, but he does make a pause between the tkiyah and the trua. So the first shita is he makes a tkiyah and he doesn't stop at all. He goes straight into the trua. Ravasi says it's all one breath, but he does make a pause between the two of them. Asking Ravasi b'hutzol k'shmaitzer, and that's Taka Ravasi was misaken that you do a pause between the trua and the tkiyah. Meisvei Yom Tov shechalias be'erev Shabbos. When Yom Tov comes out on Erev Shabbos, Taikin v'loy Mariyin. You make a tkiyah, but you don't make a trua. My lav loy Mariyin klal. L'chayra means that you don't make a trua at all. But both Ravasi and Rav Yehuda say you do. They just argue about whether there's a pause between the trua and the tkiyah. Loy, Rav Yehuda metatz tamei, Rasi metatz tamei. Rav Yehuda metatz tamei, loy Mariyin mefnei atzmei lemitoich tkiyah. Rav Yehuda says, like he said, that when it says you don't make a trua, it means you don't do it together. You don't do it separate. You do it as part of the tkiyah. Means you don't make a separate trua on a separate breath. You do make a pause, but it's still in the same breath. Moitzoi Shabbos. We said on Moitzoi Shabbos, you say Havdalah. When it's Yom Tov on Sunday, you make Havdalah. Hey, we said you say Mavdil ben Kodesh l'Kodesh. Hey, where do you say Mavdil ben Kodesh l'Kodesh? Amar Rav Yehuda b'chasim masa. Like we say. You don't say at the beginning of the bracha, you just say it at the end. He says you make it both at the beginning. You say Hamavdu ben Kodesh l'choil. He says Hamavdu ben Kodesh l'kodesh. But less elchus kavose. Halach is not like him, and that's taka what we do. If Doisa Omer ben Kodesh chama l'kodesh kal, he says you don't say ben Kodesh l'kodesh. You have to say that you're going from Shabbos to Yom Tov, which is a cooler. Yom Tov is not as chomer as Shabbos, so it shouldn't be compared. But less elchus kavose. We don't say like this. Amr of Zera. Yom Tov shechaliyas be'emshas Shabbos. When you have Yom Tov in the middle of the week, Omer have Mavdil ben Kodesh l'choil. You don't say Mavdil ben Kodesh l'kodesh, obviously. It's not ben Kodesh l'kodesh. Just from at the end of Yom Tov, you make Havdalah. You say ben Kodesh l'choil. Ben el choshech ben yisrael am ben yom hashvil shesh yemei hamasa. And you make a chiluk between yom hashvil shesh yemei hamasa. My timer. Why are you saying this last thing? Ben yom hashvil shesh yemei hamasa. It's not Shabbos. It's Yom Tov. Why are you mentioning Shabbos? It's like the more Seder Havdalah Sumayna. We're not making a bracha on the Havdalah between Shabbos and Yom Tov. We're not describing the current Havdalah. What we're doing is making a bracha on the Rebbeinu Shalom that he's mavdal between one thing and the next. So we're listing all the things that he's mavdal, all the separations, but not because today is Havdalah, not because today is Shabbos. Yom Tov, we're just mentioning all the havdalas.
But at this point, the question would be, one would think the question follows is then why do you say Ben Kodesh to Kodesh? If Ben Kodesh is not actually for now,
No, we didn't say
we're
ben
just enumerating the Ma'as of the
we say ben sheish yimei. We said ben. I hear what you're saying. You're saying if we're not worried about the fact that we say ben
a little translation.
Ben yom hashvi l'sheish yimei hamasa. So what does it make a difference? We say ben kodesh l'chol since we sometimes do have ben kodesh l'chol. I guess because no one is going to think if you say ben yom hashvi l'sheish yimei hamasa in the middle of the week that today is Shabbos. But if you say ben kodesh l'chol, that's it's not that you're describing Yom Tov in a bizyonistic way to call it chol. Right? If someone will understand that to mean that you're saying today, right here, it's a fair question. It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. Hadron Allah hakol shoychtim. Zok the Mishnah. Hashoychet echad ba'oif u'shnayim bebehema shutosik sher. If someone shechs one siman between the kana and the vesha, the trachea and the esophagus by an oif, either one of them, it's a kosher shchita. U'shnayim bebehema, and you have to do both by a behema. Shchita is a kosher shchita. The ruba shel echad kamay. It doesn't have to be the whole siman, it has to be roivus. The Yehuda Eimer, it's not enough to do the simanim, he also has to do the vridin, which is either the veins or the artery, some part of the blood circulatory system as well. If he did not a roiv, but he did half of a siman by eye, or 1.5 simanim without doing a roiv of the second siman by behema, shnitas psula. It has to be a roiv. Half is not sufficient. Roiv echad ba'oif, roiv shnayim behema, shchitas ksher. If he does roiv of 1 siman by oif and roiv of 2 by behema, shchitas ksher. The Gemara is going to ask, why do we have to say this? We already said this at the beginning of the Mishnah. It's the same thing we just said before, that we said ruba shel echad kamayu. Zok the Gemara. Hasheichet di evenin l'chatchila loy. It sounds like the Mishnah says hasheichet, which is a lashon of b'di'evet, saying it's not l'chatchila. Shnayim behema l'chatchila loy. What does it mean? We said echad ba'oif shnayim behema. How can you say on shnayim behema that it's only b'di'evet? At kamal l'shul v'lezel. What more is he supposed to cut? There is only 2 siman. Iba isayma echad ba'oif. So you could say it's only going the hasheichet. The b'di'evet part is only on echad ba'oif. It's really better to do both siman by an oif. Maybe it's going on the second part that we said that you should do a roiv as kosher, that it's still better to do the entire siman, not just part of it. And I think lahalacha, we do both simanim fully, both by a oif and by a behem. In order to satisfy both of these shitas that we say it's only b'di'evet to do one by an oif, and it's only b'di'evet to do rubai. So we do both of these things. Amar of Kahana. Minayin l'shchita shehi minat tzava. Where do we know that shchita is by the neck? Shenema, v'shachar. Now, there's a lot of things about shchita that we don't understand. Why are we picking this one? And the Gemara is going to end up by saying that it's halacha l'Moshe Misinai, because there's a lot of halachas that we learn out from halacha Moshe Misinai. But we try to learn it from a pasuk. How do we know shchita is by the neck? Shenema v'shachar is ben abakar. He should shecht the ben bakar, the egel. In bakam sheshachat chito. We take the word shachat and we divide it into 2 things. Sheshach chito, the place that it bends. Shach is that it bends. Chatay, you should be mechat it. Rashi is 2 pshatim. Chatay is either you should clean it or you should be kasher. How do you know that chito is a lashon of making it clean? And Rashi has if you say that it's chito is a lashon of hechsher, that it's kasher, is it You change this to lishna the hechsherahi. D'chsev v'chites abayis, cleaned out the house. I'll be mechata it with the twigs, and it will become tar. I think that's by Mitzayra. So you see that chata is a lashon of either cleansing or a lashon of hechsher of making something kosher. So yisach hito at the place that it bends, which is its neck, that's where you kasher the behemoth. Be'emim is nave. Let's say if you're saying from where it bends, an animal's tail bends. So let's say that's where you shecht it. So sach michlal shezach. If we make the word shachat into sach chatoi, so sach is a lashon of that it bends, not that it is bent. So it has to be that it's okay. It's really straight and it occasionally bends, but a tail is always bent. Sach michlal shezach b'ina v'hasach v'oimetu. The tail is always bent. Be'ema me aznai. Seems the ears also bend. So why can't maybe you could shecht from the ears? That because it's the sach will describe the ears. So as this is talking about the shechita of a carbon, and we know a carbon you have to shech the dam nefesh, the lifeblood, right? The dam tamsui is not sufficient. It has to be the dam that the animal dies from, and the ear obviously is not going to kill the animal if you cut it there. Maybe he starts from the ear and he keeps cutting until he gets to the dam nefesh. Visu, and additionally, shehia drasa chalada hagrama v'ikaminal, and the 5 requirements of a kosher shechita that we've mentioned of pausing and pushing and poking and going out of the proper spot and ikar and pulling out. How do you know all these requirements of shechita? El Gemara. It's a halacha l'maishim Sinai. Shechita b'natzava nami Gemara. Gamra. Shechita b'natzava is also halacha l'maishim Sinai, because we can't really answer our kashas from what we wanted to say. Shachta is sach shchata, because that could really be the ear. So what do we do with the pasuk of shachat? It's coming to tell you that when you cut it, you shouldn't split the animal in half.
Meaning you shouldn't behead the animal?
What?
Shouldn't behead the animal?
No, split it lengthwise. I think that's what it means. The Zakrashi lo l'shav yeshush l'yachta kol ha'mafrekas l'shnayim. Again, no, you shouldn't behead the animal. The hachi mashma, the teu hutza es damai v'sula. You should cut it. Sach chatai. You should cut it and clean out the blood. Or lidach lishna hechsher achilasa dahanu simanim v'sula. Means that's all that you're required to do. It's not saying you can't cut off the head. It's saying it's not required to cut off the head. Okay. If Yemer Amar Kra Zavachta, we're going to have a lot of different potential sources for this din that you shecht an animal by the neck. If Yemer Amar Kra Zavachta, Makom Shazav Chitel, from the place that it comes out, that's where you should cut it. My mashma, the high chito lishna the mitvarhu. How do we know chito is a lashon of cutting or breaking? You break it at the place where the blood comes out, right? The jugular is the place where most of the blood can come out. It's most accessible. D'chsev al tir v'al techas. Don't be afraid and don't be broken-hearted. So chito is a lashon of broken, that you break the animal, you cut it at the makom where it's up. Let's say you should cut the animal, you should break it at its nose, because animals' noses are always dripping. So it's like, no, we're not talking about it where it drips, where it comes out, because on its own, it's talking about when you cut it, when you break it, that's what causes it to come out, which is the throat. So why can't you do it by the heart? That will also cause it to pump out the blood. And how do we know all the dinim of shechita? Ella gavra. It's a halachal mishri Sinai. Shechita b'natzava nami gamra. Again, that pasuk zav is to tell you that it just has to be that you cause the blood to come out, but not that you have to behead the animal. The Beri Bishmal Tana, the Shachat, Al Tikri B'Shachat Ela V'Sacha. You change the Shachat to a shin to a sin, like we often do. So they tell you, Makom Shesach Tito, the place where the animal makes its noises, that's where you're going to shecht it and make it kosher or cleaning. And where does the voice come from? The voice comes from the throat. The Eimim L'Shayna, let's say from its tongue, that's also how it expresses itself. It's like more being Dama Nefesh V'Leko. But that's not the Dama Nefesh. The Karava Azala Dama Nefesh. Maybe you'll stop by the tongue and go to where it gets the Dama Nefesh. V'su Shia Drosh Chalad Agram V'Ika B'Nalon Ela Gamra Shita B'Natzav Nami Gamra V'Kral Mayasu Lo Shavi Gister. Again, it's coming to tell you that all is required is chato, that you get out the dam, but not that you cut off the head. So we had 3 pshatim so far. Now we have a 4th pshat. The sequence of psukim, the pasuk says that when they bring an oila, the kohanim would take the pieces of the behema and put it on they would arrange it on the mizbeach and they would burn it. Sheitam aloymer es harosh v'esafada. The whole pasuk is what does that have to say? It said the nisachim, the pieces. So why does it have to mention specifically the head, the roish, and the father, which is the fats? It's already included. So why was it stated separately? The pasuk says earlier, you should skin the animal and cut it into pieces. How do we know it's only including those things that have to be skinned? The nesachim, that after the shechita, you need to skin the rest of the animal, and then you cut into pieces. How do you know the roish? The roish was already cut off beforehand because it was shechted. So that's why we have to say the roish and the feather, because the roish, we'll get to the feather later, but the roish, since it's not included in the skinning, since it was already separated prior to by the shechita, so it wasn't included that we first skinned and then separated, because its separation happened first. So that's why we're telling you as roish and sudroi, even though it's not included in the skinning, it still is included to be put on the mizbeh. In fact, so you see, obviously, that it has to be shechted by the throat in order for, if we're presuming that the head is cut off or separated, the simanim are separated. So that's how we know that shechita is from the throat. These are 2 separate psukim. That's in pasuk Yud Ches. And the first pasuk, the pasuk of Vakum now is a kind of stuckum. As a roish v'esaf father, that's in pasuk Vav. Why are we referring to 2 different places? Why do we need twice to say es roish ufidrei? Hachikama minayin l'rabes a roish kfar hutas tamalayim es a roish v'esaf father. Ein echanami. The answer to this kasha of how do we know that the roish is also included to be nerach on the mizbeach? That's from the first pasuk with roish v'esaf father. So why do we say a second time? How do you know that those are placed on the mizbeach first? So now that we've said this, so we said why we needed roisha ufidroi to tell you that the head and the fats go first, and we had to say the first roisha because that was telling us that the shechita happens by the neck. But what did we say about the first fats? Why did that have to be said? We said all the nesachim go on the mizbeach, so why do we have to say the feather separately? That he takes the fats and he spreads it on the place of the shechita. It's not appropriate to have the place of the shechita exposed, so you cover with the fats, so it should be covered. Okay, we'll stop over here. I have
Thank
to
you.
leave the last shot for tomorrow.
No,
Go ahead.
great.